What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to Mets Weekly. But before we get into today's video, I want to remind everyone to hit the like button, subscribe to the Mets Weekly YouTube channel, and turn on those post notifications to not miss live recordings of the Mets Weekly podcast every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, all off season long. Make sure to follow all of us on TikTok, on X for more content over there, and follow all three hosts individually. The links are in the description. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. And with the Mets missing the postseason with a near $400 million payroll, they have their work cut out for them this winter. And before we get into free agency and trade targets, the Mets still have things to address internally. One of them being the trade chips that are on the 40-man roster who could be moved in a potential blockbuster or salary dump to deepen or improve the team. So today we're going to list for you guys 7 Mets who could be traded this offseason.
You look at this Mets roster and you expect David Stearns to be very active in the free agent and trade market. Well, you have to be able to clean up some of this 40-man to 26-man roster. And again, these are some guys who could potentially be out of minor league options that you need to make or break type of deals. Do you see these guys as they need to be on the roster compared to guys that maybe you clear one of these guys out to improve externally? If you want to see the Mets make drastic changes, and especially after a disappointing season that we just watched, I expect a very aggressive offseason that David Stearns tries to trim the fat of this roster.
And I do want to mark a disclaimer here. We do not have sources. We don't claim to have any sources. And to prove it, we are just going to split these 7 players into 3 different groups. The first 2 players are the long shots, players that make sense to either sell high on, are expendable due to the depth chart, but they are likely not going to be moved since they do make an impact through a 162-game season. Next 3 players are the prerequisites. These are names that have been mentioned in trade talks multiple times before and are likely on borrowed time given their status, role, lack of flexibility, or overall player value. And then there's the final 2 players, which are as expected. These players are most likely pieces that get moved this winter, and we'd be shocked if they don't. And they will also get a separate video about them when the offseason officially starts. It is process of elimination of guys who could be on the move, so let's get into this list. So we're going to start with the long shots category, and I think we're going to start here with a player that I think out of all 7 of them is least likely to be traded, but you never know considering if they make any major changes in the pitching staff, and that being David Peterson. Now, David Peterson is obviously entering a 30-year-old season. He is in the final year of arbitration as a pending free agent. He definitely seems like one of the more expendable trade chips to make way for a possible frontline starter acquisition, or maybe give guys like Nolan McLean, Brandon Sproat, Christian Scott when he comes back from injury, and maybe eventually Jonah Tong, who will likely start in AAA, to develop some more major league innings and major league experience, considering he has built up a little bit of a name for himself in the Mets rotation over these last few years. He is projected to make $9.2 million in arbitration 3. So again, it's not a lot of money that you would want to cut, but it's more of just a depth chart reason as to why the Mets would possibly move David Peterson. He's in the long shots category for a reason. One of the more expandable pieces who will eventually be a pending free agent that likely will not be extended long-term on this team unless he has a miraculous 2026 season.
Over the last 2 years, we've seen David Peterson become a productive major league starter. It is 1 year left, and we've seen how many times with David Stearns in the past in Milwaukee where he sees pitchers that he's not going to extend. He flips for controllable assets. And I think you could be really selling high, and especially when it comes to the starting pitching market. How many times do we say when we look at contracts that back-end starters are getting $15, $16, $17 million, David Peterson would have a lot of value on the trade market. And let's say you are, and we expect the Mets to be in the market for an ace, maybe he could be a big piece in the trade for an ace, or David Stearns can asset manage here and say, hey, if we're bringing in a frontline guy and a team is really interested, and there are always teams desperate for starting pitching, and a below market value mid-rotation arm can probably get you a couple nice controllable pieces, and you can get some more value into an asset that we all know David Stearns is not willing to spend on starting pitching. At least David Peterson is not a type of guy you go all out to extend. So you use the ability, you trade him, recoup some assets that you don't lose them for nothing, not just a draft pick. Again, you can maybe open up that roster spot for a top flight starter.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the value that comes from David Peterson is obviously his ability to go deep into games. He's been able to give them somewhat of consistency, work a lot quicker as compared to some of these other starters who really, really struggle to go deep into games. And he seemed to be that token piece. But we've also have seen for multiple years now that there's kind of a burnout from this guy around August, September, around the second half. And this year, he obviously got his first selection to the All-Star game. And ever since then, he kind of tapered off a little bit. He started being one of the golden pieces of a guy who can go deep into games and give you volume to being part of the problem. Does that mean that he should be on his way out of here? No, but it makes sense if the Mets want to move on from David Peterson to maybe strengthen the rotation. Andrew, if you're looking around the league, what sort of teams do you think would be interested in this? Because obviously cost controllable starters that cost less than $10 million definitely have value, whether they have 1 year of control left or not.
And you look at teams that are losing a bunch of starting pitchers. I think 2 teams in the National League West and 1 in the American League East. You look at the San Diego Padres. They're most likely losing both Dylan Cease and Michael King. So they're losing a bunch of innings in that rotation. Look at a team that was just in the World Series a couple of years ago, the Arizona Diamondbacks. They're losing most likely Zach Gallen. They traded Merrill Kelly. At the end of last season, the names they were throwing out there were ridiculous. It was Eduardo Rodriguez, Brandon Pfaadt, and then AAA players. In the Boston Red Sox, they're losing Lucas Giolito. They obviously have Garrett Crochet. They have a couple of young prospects that came up at the back half of the season that maybe can compete for that, but they don't have a lot of rotation. But they could use a solid number 3 starter, and I expect them to be big game hunting, but also think they would be in the market for another mid-rotation starter, so they don't have to put that much pressure on the 2 kids that they called up at the end of the season. Those 3 teams would be very interested in a guy like David Peterson.
One more other detail, I know a lot of people will see that using a 6-man rotation would include guys like David Peterson in it, or maybe you turn him into a long reliever. I don't think the Mets are going to be inclined to move David Peterson to the bullpen because he is going to be in a contract year and he's going to want to market himself as a starting pitcher. And with the Mets having some of these options, whether it's internally or hunting for guys on the trade market or signing starting pitchers, there's definitely a limited amount of spots right now in this rotation. And I feel like maybe David Peterson is probably one of the guys that ends up getting the cut there. And then there is the second long shot trading piece, and that being Brett Baty. Brett Baty obviously is going into a 26-year-old season following career bests in all offensive categories, where he also developed into a very sure-handed defensive third baseman. Now, obviously, the goal on this one would be selling high on a very low ceiling player, it has seemed like for multiple years now, with 4 years of control left. And it more pertains to the Mets trying to improve their run prevention at a premium position and maybe pursue a second baseman or a third baseman on the free agent or trade market. That's more of how I see it as a strong possibility if they look at that, because we've talked about the run prevention before. But it is easy to say, and I think it's very simple to say, as someone who's been a big critic of Brett Baty for years now, he has earned the right to be the starting third baseman on opening day for this team next year.
Let's be honest, there wasn't many ups or downs. It's been mostly downs for Brett. The defense has been subtly improving throughout the years. But again, now you're adding some versatility with him being able and not being a negative defender at second base. So now you're adding some diversity defensively, not just sticking to third base. So you're selling on a guy that, again, maybe a team is desperate for a left-handed bat, a team that's always needing team control. So again, one of these cheaper market teams who maybe are losing a third baseman, a team like maybe the Detroit Tigers who, were interested in trading for Geno Suarez at the deadline. Well, no, they didn't want to do it because they didn't want to take the money on. They've been in Bregman talks in the past, and they've been very young with their core, Torkelson and guys like that. You put a guy like that, 4 years of cheap team control, that could fit. Again, we've seen this how many times with Mets players, young-ish players, where you see a high that can you consistently do it? Yes, we'll see with the new hitting coaches and hitting coordinators, and we'll see if the philosophy We both see that maybe that can continue this mini Brett Beatty breakout. But again, this is a guy that, again, this is the definition of a sell high but also you do run that risk of, hey, maybe this is the breakout. And I'm not saying he's a star, but this is, if he continues this type of pace, he's a starting big league third baseman who has showed he can play second base. And I do firmly believe, again, tries spring training, he could potentially play left field. I'm not saying every day, but again, sort of like Jeff McNeil in center field. I'd like to see the versatility, and David Stearns has been very adamant of adding versatility in defenders. And if he's setting run prevention, I think the other guys that we're going to talk about, that's more why I think guys we're going to talk about later are more expendable than Brett, because obviously Brett has showed good defensive that would help the run prevention. Yes, he's not great, or could they obviously get better? Of course. But I do think, again, I'm not against, especially if you're getting a big time upgrade offensively or, on the rotation, if this is a main piece that maybe you don't have to give up the prospects. Let's say, hey, we want Brett Beatty, and maybe you don't have to trade a second starting pitcher in a trade for a superstar left-handed pitcher. Maybe Brett Beatty's the big major league piece in a blockbuster trade instead of holding on to your cost-controllable prospect.
I know a lot of people are high on Brett Beatty coming after this season, and for good reason, to be honest. And when you're talking about it in comparison to what it was for the first few years of his major league career, he had broke out in a certain way where we started to see what he was capable of, whether it was offensively, not to mention at third base, providing the versatility at second base, but also the fact of, I don't know how this would possibly hold up, because there's still things that I just don't really like about this bat, and still have not liked about this bat since probably the early days from when he was drafted. If they can find a way to make those adjustments, and if they actually do believe in Brett Beatty in the long shot category, I'm not surprised if they end up holding on to him. Again, this is more of me on my side, because I know you're a lot higher on Brett Beatty than me, but on my side, I think this is a piece that you should sell high on. Will they end up doing it? Probably not. But again, I just don't know how that kind of holds up. I don't know how this bat can be consistent. I know this bat has talent, but I don't know how it can be consistent enough to not just say, well, he's serviceable at third base, and he probably should just be batting ninth for this team.
You look at a team like the Miami Marlins, which have had some interest in Brett Beatty in the past in the Epler regime, where there was rumors of potentially an Edward Cabrera or Jesus Luzardo 1-for-1 swap for Brett Beatty. You look at that team, yes, that team is a pain in the ass against us and obviously loves, knocking us out. But you look at their second base, third base, it's Connor Norby, who was a solid prospect, and Xavier Edwards, who really is horrific defensively at second base, but, is what he is, a slap hitting bat. That could potentially be an upgrade there. You also, again, a team that potentially, hopefully, if, we're doing this day of Game 7, maybe the Seattle Mariners. Obviously, Jorge Polanco, pending UFA. You look at Gino Suarez, pending UFA. If they don't retain Gino, which, again, he maybe has the biggest swing in Mariners history, maybe that, potentially gets him locked up. But again, if he walks, that opens up third base. And we all know Jerry Dipoto loves to make trades. David Stearns has been, in the past, very good friends and trade friends with Jerry Dipoto. So again, there could be something there if a guy like Gino and Jorge Polanco decide to walk. That would open up both second base and third base, where potential of Brett Beatty can slide in. And maybe we get some of their plentiful of that deep farm system. Maybe we get an East Little prospect 1-for-1 swap, or maybe a back-end reliever, because their bullpen is also very good.
And now that brings us to this second tier of prerequisites that have been mentioned before or are possibly seen on the move to deepen the team or clean out the bench, do things like that. But all of these guys are pretty much in the same category. All of them are in certain situations where they're limited in one skill or kind of correspond with each other for what decision they're going to make. So as for the first one, you have Luis Angel Acuna entering a 24-year-old season, who was mainly a pinch runner and a part-time player last season. He is a toolsy player. We know he has the positional versatility, the plus base running as his best asset. You have right now, at this current moment, one of their top prospects, Jet Williams, waiting in the wings, who we all can expect to have more upside as a major league player as compared to somebody like Luis Angel Acuna. You will not be able to develop a young player like this, such as Luis Angel Acuna, while he's sitting on the bench. And obviously with better bench options out there on the free agent market that can possibly deepen this team. And he could be appealing to maybe some teams that like to go heavy on platoons, because he has had some minor contact success against left-handed pitching, but nothing special. Then you also have Ronnie Mauricio, who will be going into a 25-year-old season after returning from torn ACL surgery that he underwent back in December of 2023. He probably should have been in AAA to play every day and get back up to speed this season, but he wasn't. Instead, he got the limiting playing time after being called up earlier than expected due to an injury replacement. He's a switch hitter, obviously inconsistent and vulnerable as a right-handed hitter. He has a career 119 weighted runs created plus against right-handed pitching in just 206 plate appearances. I would prefer, personally, to give him another year with his strong arm and great defense at third base. But if Beatty is still here, it gives a very small window for both Beatty and Mauricio, who both also are not the best against left-handed pitching. They might still be high on him. We don't know. But like Acuna, he isn't going to get better or ramp up from his injury, which he's been sitting out a long time from, just sitting on the bench, which seems like what he was doing a lot in 2025. And then there is Mark Vientos, who is going into a 26-year-old season with his best value as a DH. We all can agree that he should not be playing third base possibly ever again. He's coming off of a declined year from his breakout in 2024. Multiple teams have shown interest over this most recent trading deadline, and he would certainly be traded if the Mets were to shop in the DH market this winter. Not only is it a clog at third base or second base, or not many positions or much playing time is available, all three of these guys are out of minor league options. So it's either you play them or you pretty much DFA them, or they rot on the bench and don't get any better. So someone's going to have to go out of these three. They're going to have to figure it out somehow. But obviously, like we said, they all correspond with each other.
And you have three different players that are good at one tool, or at least upside. You look at Mark Vientos, who's had the most success out of the three, obviously becoming breaking out in 2024 and having a remarkable postseason run. You look at a guy like Ronnie Mauricio, he has the highest upside. That's what everyone has said when, we had that group of Beatty, Alvarez, and Mauricio. Obviously Alvarez was the number one prospect, but everyone loved the pure talent, giant upside of potential that what Ronnie Mauricio was, a 6'5" giant who was lanky at the time. Obviously puts the muscle in, and obviously we've seen the exit velos. Also saw some clutch hits at times during the season when he was getting everyday playing time. And then Luis Acuna, who again in 2024, when Lindor gets hurt, he steps right in. It was productive, and then you see him just become a runner and late game defensive replacement. With Mauricio, again, like you said, he should have been getting playing time every day. And look at Mark Vientos, like you said, he should never own a glove again. And you look at what David Stern says about run prevention. That kind of, for me, seals Mark Vientos ever playing another game for the New York Mets. That he was so adamant in his postseason press conference. But it's about run prevention. It's about run prevention. Well, you can't have a guy, yes, I understand the DH position is there, but what has been the biggest weakness since the National League implemented the DH? The Mets have the worst offensive production from the DH position. It's been the biggest bugaboo if they want to do this platoon, or you want to put, a guy like Vientos. You need to get consistent offense. It's literally a free position for offense, and his up and down not consistency is a problem. And especially if this team wants to get back in the playoffs, you're going to need to get some consistency from the DH position. And again, to go to Acuna, if he's just going to be a speed and defense guy, yes, that's valuable. But again, how valuable when you only have three spots on the bench? He doesn't hit a lick. He doesn't you can say he's a little bit better against left-handers. He's not providing you any power. It's slap hitting at its best. And we've seen him. He's at a minor league option. And even when he goes down to the minor leagues, he seems to not really care. So the stuff coming out of spring training this past season where he's a big, it's really a big time when the lights are important. I think we saw that at end of 2024. It just didn't translate here. So, I wouldn't be surprised if all three of these guys are gone, or pick one. We'll go back to the long shot. You have to pick one of the four. And I do expect them to be active in the trade market. You need to clean this bench up. But as Frank said all the time, that there's no options off the bench. It's just more gloves and gloves, which is fine. So if I'm David Stern, and we've said it since these kids have all come up, pick one and say, this is our guy. If you're going to pick Beatty because he gives you the best defensive upside, and with bat potential, then pick them and get rid of the other two. If you're still believing in the upside of Ronnie Mauricio, pick Ronnie Mauricio and deal high on Beatty and clear it out. Like, I think that's my main problem and hope this offseason is you have this group. You've had them for multiple years. Again, Vientos is going to be 26. Beatty's 26. Mauricio, I guess, he did lose a year, but he's 25. And Acuna doesn't have the homegrown. I know people could care about the homegrown thing. Acuna's not homegrown. So if I'm David Stearns, put your stamp on one of these guys and clear out the bench because the bench production does need to go up. So pick one and clear the other guys up because this is just a clog on the 26-man roster as well as the 40-man roster because you risk going into spring training. We're going to keep them all. And if they have bad springs or let's say one gets hurt, you have to DFA and you need to open up a 40-man roster spot. You're just going to have to DFA him and lose him for nothing.
And when we talk about the infield or some of these guys playing the outfield, which, again, guys playing out of position is not going to help the run prevention of this team, whether we want Brett Beatty playing different positions or not, or whether we want Mark Vientos moving over to first if you end up losing Pete Alonso to free agency, like those all don't really help the situation. And it's more of just the fact that none of these bats have been prolific enough or impactful enough to say, well, we need to get this bat in the lineup. When you talk about all three of these infielders, Vientos, Mauricio, Acuna, Beatty, the situation doesn't get any better if you want to bring up Jet Williams to the major leagues as well. So that's now 5 young infielders who you expect to right now be projected on the MLB roster at some point. You don't have 5 infield spots available. Shortstop is locked down. You don't know what's going to happen at first base, and none of these guys can catch. That's Francisco Alvarez's job. They're going to have to figure something out because if you just have a young guy rotting on the bench, it is not going to help at all. It's better to have a veteran on the bench who can be a part-time player than having a young guy on the bench doing absolutely nothing. Because then when you see things like that, you see plays like Ronnie Mauricio forgetting to cover third in must-win games. You see these mental mistakes that these guys can't learn through and play through because they're not playing at all. So they're going to have to make a decision. Now, obviously, there's teams that could be interested. We've seen, multiple teams talk about their interest. We've seen the White Sox say that they like Vientos. We've seen them say that they like Mauricio. We've seen some stuff linked in with Acuna as maybe a sweetener in, potential Luis Robert trades or something like that. But again, it's a glut of infielders that they're going to have to figure out how to break up. But as for just these 3, Acuna, Mauricio, and Vientos, 2 questions. Who would you prefer to trade the most? Who is the guy who you would say is the most likely to be shipped out of here this winter?
I'll take a little bit of what Stearns is saying into my answer. I do think Mark Vientos has had his time, and we've seen it's not just the in-season struggles. We've also seen kind of some of the attitude stuff where it's like, oh, big deal, God, you're going to trade me in the deadline. And the fact that Stearns, again, we keep saying this press conference, if he's going to continue to praise run prevention, I can't see a guy like Mark Vientos being on this roster. He can't play first base. Obviously, we saw a few games. He doesn't have the footwork. He doesn't have the defensive chops to play first base. And you shouldn't be, oh, that's our answer to, if Alonso goes elsewhere, that shouldn't be, well, let's just go here. I think you clear him out. One, you clear out the DH position. So if he wants to go out and add an actual proven MLB caliber DH, it gives you that luxury. Who do I think is most likely? I'd probably say Luis Angel Acuna. He could be easily thrown or something. Even let's say it's not even traded. I think he's the weakest one where you could see him be DFA. Because let's say we get to roster crunch, and let's say they sign a versatile piece, or let's say trade for a Caleb Durbin type. I know obviously the Brewers got eliminated, but let's just say just for utility, we've seen Stearns love that. Let's say a player that. And if there is no interest in Luis Angel Acuna, which we've seen, there hasn't been much since the offseason of 2024. There's a world where if they already find his replacement, you need the 40-man roster spot. I think there's a world if he's not traded, he's DFA this summer, where you could just say, all right, we've got his replacement, cost controllable, maybe even has a minor league option. a guy like Acuna who's out of it, they just say, you know what? What are you losing? You're just losing speed and defense. We've already got that at cheaper cost with potential an option. So I think Acuna is the most likely to not be on the 40-man roster, 26-man roster come spring training. I do think Vientos should be the guy that goes.
I mean, we'll see with the type of message that is being sent from David Stearns. We do know that, again, this position will clog up with the infield defense being a massive issue for this team. They're going to have to do somewhat of a shakeup. And whether that means going out on the free agent market and getting a starting caliber player or just outright moving one of these guys, they're going to have to figure it out. And even though these guys are at their lowest value, it doesn't seem like any of these guys are going to get enough playing time to get that value up. We also can say that all three of these guys could be moved as well. Like, there is a reality where that possibly happens as well. Now, speaking of that reality of guys who we think that are most likely out of anyone to be traded this offseason, and that is obviously the as expected category. And we start off with someone who we think, again, in the infield mix as well, but some utility. Jeff McNeil is someone that I think we all can pretty much agree that we would be shocked if he's not moved this offseason. He is owed almost $16 million in 2026 with a club option for 2027 after signing that 4-year, $50 million extension in the 2023 offseason that bought out the last 2 years of arbitration. This would be an ideal salary to possibly cut for more luxury tax space, which they don't technically need, but when you're talking about sustainability and talking about the depth of the roster, it makes a lot more sense. His best asset, obviously, is that defensive versatility. He played center field for a majority of the season for the first time in his career this season, but his bat overall, it has regressed. He did not hit for much contact or power in 2025 after coming back from an oblique injury he suffered in spring training. It's also another way to give the young players and prospects some playing time at the major league level, like we talked about Jet Williams, or maybe one of the young infielders as well. Again, Stearns, like we said, he's preached run prevention in his closing presser, and that will not improve with an aging Jeff McNeil in center field. Whether he was respectable there or not, you'd have to strengthen up the middle. And also, overall, it's time to move on and send in a message for some accountability. After 8 seasons that he has had with the Mets, we've seen the best days of Jeff McNeil. I think we all have. And, regardless about how we feel about him, I know you and me are not the biggest fans of Jeff McNeil. We've established that for many, many years. But I think that this is now run its course, and it is time to now make way to the next generation of young infielders or possible utility guys that are not named Jeff McNeil.
Obviously, we've been on the trade Jeff McNeil for about 14 years, it seems like, but he's more expendable because of a guy we had in the long shots. Brett Beatty's versatility has kind of made him obsolete because, yes, he's playing third, he could play second, and you're playing him at league men are just getting ready to hit arbitration. And even that arbitration number, because of how bad he's been the first couple of years of his career, that number is not going to be more than maybe $1 million or $2 million. How many times have we seen in Milwaukee, David Stearns? Okay, I have a guy 5 cents on the dollar, can do the same thing he does. Again, Brett Beatty also still has upside that we hope that, could be tapped up even more. So he's expendable. You talk about Jet Williams. We also talk about a guy like potentially we've seen in the system continue to go up. Maybe even a guy like Jacob Reimer at some point. I'm not saying on opening day, but another younger guy that could potentially, need some space to play in the big league. So you look at a guy like Jeff McNeil, his value is higher than what it was last year. At least now there could be a team it's on a 1-year deal, like you said. Obviously the option, but for a team that's acquiring him, they could really just see Jeff McNeil as a 1-year deal. Because if it goes bad, they decline the team option, and it's only 1 year of Jeff McNeil. So now he's even more expendable to a team. You'd maybe chip up a couple $1 million, or maybe instead of $16 million, you chop it down to 10 for a team. You eat 6, you get a little bit better prospect return, and you get a prospect, and then you clear up that roster spot and you use that extra $10 million to improve the bullpen. Go maybe clear up money, maybe make a secondary trade in the starting rotation. I do think, we've talked about McNeil being moved, and obviously we would have moved him when his value was at its highest, or hell, maybe not even extending him. But We've gone through the contract. Now the contract is movable and it is a lot more movable. And I think there will be teams that still are interested because, again, they could see, oh, he's versatile. I can use him in left field for teams. Or, hey, I need a second baseman as a stopgap. I need a stopgap. I'm the Detroit Tigers and I have Kevin McGonigal. And I don't think Kevin McGonigal is going to be ready for spring training to go on opening day. I can acquire a guy like Jeff McNeil. It's 1 year. If he has a bad year, whatever, McGonigal can step right in. I'm just using the Tigers as an example because he has showed he's a big league hitter. Again, second base is a position. He's down overall in the game. There are not any of them available. You know, maybe a guy like Gleyber Torres seems to be the only free agent second baseman to potentially, play second base. We'll see if a team maybe view Bo Bichette as a second baseman. So again, let's say there are teams that are interested in Gleyber that don't get Gleyber. They can pivot to the Mets. The Mets can take on, maybe eat some money to even get rid of them, and they go and you move them out. And like we said, if it's Beatty, if it's Jet, if it's whoever of the other, Mauricio or Luis Acuna, you freely open up second base. And if you want to go into camp, and let's say two of these guys here are Jet, you go into spring training, have a full-on real competition for second base. Yes, Brett can obviously go to third, so if Brett's playing third and they add externally to a second, opens up second base, maybe you want to bring in a proven second baseman, and again, let Jet kind of continue to cook because obviously he missed 2024 being injured. He hasn't looked amazing in AAA, so it gives him a little bit more season. You don't have to rush him up here. But again, you don't want to clog it up for potentially him being that future second baseman.
All of these positions that McNeil can play, left field and right field, we've seen him play that extensively with the Mets over his long tenure here. Left field and right field are locked down with Nimmo and Soto there. So again, that leaves center field. If you're talking about emphasis on run prevention, a 34-year-old Jeff McNeil in center field is just not going to work out. It's not going to. And they kind of did it into emergency because of Jose Siri's injury so early in the year. When he was rehabbing, he played center field. And even though he was okay, again, covering that sort of ground, they do need to figure that out, especially with guys like Nimmo and Soto, both in the corners who are not the best fleet of foot at their respective positions. We've mentioned Seattle before. We have mentioned Kansas City before if they're looking for utility pieces. I mean, is there anybody else that you would add to that list? I mean, it kind of changes it within waves here because we've talked about this for so long.
Brought up the Detroit Tigers because Gleyber Torres is going to walk, and I do not think McGonigal was in Double-A, so I don't expect him to start on the big league roster right away unless he's one of the best prospects in baseball. So there's a world that he comes to spring training and just rakes. So, that's a possibility. But again, just as a backup plan for a guy like McNeil. Again, KC, we've seen them do this all the time. They love their kind of utility guys. But obviously, Miguel Garcia breaking out massively. Last year, they traded for Jonathan India. Obviously, they have, Vinny and Junior filling up the rest of that infield. So, another team, San Francisco Giants, they were running like Casey Schmidt and at second base. They could use another left-handed bat after trading guys like Yastrzemski. Obviously, they have Devers, but there really isn't. I'm not saying McNeil's on the Devers level, but they don't really have. So I think Drew Gilbert was the only other left-handed bat in their lineup. So maybe add another left-handed bat. I'm not going to say McNeil's going to use McCovey Cove, but again, if we're at slap hitter, maybe he hits the alley. He's not fast, but again, maybe that's a field that potentially can fit well with him. And obviously, we saw this past deadline, Stearns make some moves with Buster Posey, so maybe there is a little bit of relationships. And they've seemed to continue to want to compete and don't really bother taking on money and wanting to spend money. And they need a second base upgrade. So maybe that could be a potential fit in the National League.
They got to move on from something here. I mean, something that's remained constant for 8 seasons. And the seventh and final one on this list is not only a could be, but pretty much need to be traded at this current moment, and that being Kodai Senga. Now, he will be going into a 33-year-old season in year 4 of a 5-year, $75 million contract that he signed in winter of 2023. And after a phenomenal rookie year, he just has not been able to regain form as much since multiple injuries have happened. He was optioned to AAA Syracuse later on this season after a brilliant start to 2025. But the problem here is with this certain situation and context is that he's kind of too much of a headache to roster. He needs an extra day of rest. He's injury prone as he gets older, and the availability has not been great. And his stuff has definitely regressed over these last few years as well. And if you were to acquire a frontline arm that everybody wants to and everyone's been pushing for, they will not be pitching every 6 days like it will have to be with Senga, because if you trade for a frontline piece, you want them making 30 or 33 starts every year and not 25 from a 6-man rotation from your starting pitcher 1. He is still a cost controllable arm that is currently making, compared to the market, starting pitcher 5 money. So it is a very movable contract, but it definitely comes with a lot of baggage. Now, Andrew, I know that you have been vocal about Kodai Senga moving on from him given the certain situation. It has nothing to do with the overall talent or overall ability. It's the fact that it's likely just not worth the hassle anymore, and they have to move on. He's not available, and it doesn't seem like it's going to get any better as he gets into his mid-30s.
The talent is there. We've seen it, and we've seen, obviously, that great rookie year. And then he gets injured. It misses all of last year. It shows up at the postseason and gets hammered. And then this year, he looks to start the season pretty good. Goes to make an easy, simple PFP. Try to cover first base. Of course, he lands funny and then blows out his hamstring, which I still can understand how you just blow out your hamstring by just tapping first base. But again, it is what it is with Kodai Senga. And he was never the same guy again. And even when at his best this year, it was kind of fraudulent because how many base runs he was allowing, and he was getting out of jams. But it seemed like every inning he Houdini'd his way out of it. It looked like, how many times was there a guy in scoring position less than 2 outs, but he found a way to get out of it. So it wasn't going to be sustainable even if he was healthy. And then he gets hurt again. And then we get these post-game comments of saying, I'm mentally not right. My body's not, I'm not mentally, physically there. Well, you can't be doing that in this market. Like, he needs to go to a small market to get the eyes off him. And I'm not discrediting mental health. Obviously, I understand. Everyone goes through everything. But here's the deal. We've given you everything you've asked for. You want a 6-man rotation. You want to do this. You want to do this. And you haven't reciprocated back. And I think we've gotten to a time where we're like, all right, enough is enough. And when David Stearns was not very pleased, it seemed, at that postseason press conference, being like, well, you can't pencil in 30 starts. And he's got talent. And would I be surprised if he goes to a smaller market and maybe makes another all-star game or two and goes back and it's productive? Yeah. But I also believe the Mets might be big game hunting for starting pitching. And like we talked about with David Peterson, you got to start moving out some of these salaries. You need to start shedding some payroll. And I get, yes, Ed, we have more money than Jesus. I understand that. But even still, we don't know what the financial structure for the CBA after the season. And if you want to continue to make some moves, you'd like to kind of lower the tax penalty, especially if maybe knowing the lockout's coming, maybe they're a lot more aggressive in free agent market on non-qualifying offer talent, that I could see them being more aggressive, adding talent as well in the trade market. So you have to open up some spots. And again, it's a below market value contract, and small market teams will definitely be interested in just the talent and the contract to have that upside for a smaller market team.
I mean, I think the main punchline for us putting him on this list was probably when he was down in AAA doing bullpen sessions. They were not going well. And then we saw that maybe the heat in Florida in September was a factor for him. I mean, it's gotten to a point where we're seeing way too many accommodations needing to be made to where you can't depend on him every 5 days. Not to mention, we knew at the beginning he's not going to be pitching every 5 days because we need to give him an extra day as well. I mean, it's just too much of a headache to deal with all of this with Kodai Senga and finding a way to get him into this rotation when likely it's disrupting everybody else in the rotation and everybody else in the bullpen when he can't go deep into the game and he loses the strike zone. So much has to go well for things to be paying off for a guy like Kodai Senga. It's just the worst of it is not worth the hassle. Now, obviously some teams, I know that you have mentioned Baltimore before on the other end of a possible Kodai Senga trade. I mean, this contract is very, very movable. But like we said, it just comes with some baggage. So what teams would you say would express interest if Kodai Senga were to be made available this winter on the trade market?
I do think Baltimore is kind of that perfect small market team that's looking to bounce back. a team that needs innings, which again, not reliable, and again, they need kind of a high upside opportunity because again, we've seen that they don't want to spend on the free agent market. He has 2 years of team control, can kind of fill that Sugano money equal. I think Sugano was making $13 million this past season. So again, financially, it would just be kind of even swap. Chicago Cubs, they're losing Matthew Boyd. Obviously, they hit a home run on a Stearnsian type move this past offseason of signing Matt Boyd as a buy low candidate, and he gave them everything you possibly could ask for. He's going to be becoming a pending UFA. Obviously, they've got Shota Imanaga. Cade Horton came up and proved that he is potentially a front end guy. So they could use a middle of rotation guy. The Cubs most likely not going to re-sign Kyle Tucker. So maybe they take the Boyd money with maybe the Tucker money that they don't spend. They want to continue to add in that rotation. Obviously, Jameson Taillon is there as well. So that could be, or Senga can fit in kind of that 4 or 5, 3 or 4 spot, again, where you should be financially. You can bring back a couple of teams to talk about with David Peterson. San Diego makes sense. Boston makes sense. Arizona, he'd maybe prefer a team like Arizona on the West Coast. San Diego as well, get back on the West Coast. Tiny market. Nobody really pays attention to them. They could kind of perfectly, be able to accommodate, and it wouldn't be a big hassle and mainstream attention. And maybe even goes back to his all-star Rookie of the Year form, which I'm not saying Kodai Senga can't go back to being a potential front-end guy. But I do expect the Mets to go out and get more consistently and reliable front-end talent. And again, we've talked about it. The hassle for this guy is not worth the upside when there are better potential trade targets that you can go and say, hey, open this front-end spot in the rotation and to go get those guys.
Obviously, there is plenty of changes that need to be made, plenty of stuff that they need to do over this offseason. And as for this video, we are going to end it off here. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, subscribe if you have not already. Make sure to turn on those post notifications to not miss when we go live for the Mets Weekly podcast every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Follow everyone individually. Those links are in the description. Let's go Mets. We have a long off season ahead of us, and we will see you guys next time.